Welcome to SB&M is Here, the State Bar of New Mexico's official podcast. In this series, we'll discuss topics such as professional development, tools of the legal trade, and mental and professional well-being. Connecting the legal community across New Mexico, SB&M is here. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SB&M is Here. As always, this is Morgan Pettit, Member Services Manager and Podcast Producer. We are now on our way to establishing a tradition with this episode, of which I am very excited. I know I'm excited for all of our episodes, but this one is a wonderful tradition to be starting. Last year, we began the Young Lawyers Division series of What I Wish I Knew with the 2020 State Bar President, Tina Cruz. And now it's time to hear from our 2021 Bar President, Carla Martinez. Carla in this episode is interviewed by Shasta Inman, who is the 2021 Young Lawyers Division Chair. And I am personally just honored that the first two bar presidents on the SB&M is Here series have been women. Better yet, both Young Lawyers Division chairs who have interviewed the presidents have also been women. And the exciting news is this trend will continue in 2022. So it's truly wonderful that there's such strong leadership from women in the state bar community. I just wanted to give that little shout out. So tune in as Carla shares her journey working with different state agencies, how she views mentoring and its importance, and why she refers to herself as, quote, the master of none. So Shasta, feel free to take it away.
Welcome to the Young Lawyers Division podcast series, What I Wish I Knew. My name is Shasta Inman. I am the 2021 chair of the State Bar of New Mexico Young Lawyers Division, and I am honored to be here today with Carla Martinez, the State Bar's 2021 president. Carla Martinez currently serves as the Chief Administrative Officer at the 2nd Judicial District Attorney's Office, and she will be sharing her experience and expertise with us today on the topics of day-to-day relationships, money, balance, and growth. President Martinez, your legal career has not taken a path that many would consider typical. In addition to being an attorney, you are a certified public accountant and a certified fraud examiner. Can you run us through how you came to do what you do?
Absolutely, Shasta. Thank you for having me today. My career has been interesting. I actually got my undergrad degree in accounting and decided a couple years into working that it wasn't really what I wanted to do long term. And I actually was doing an audit of a university that I went to New Mexico State University. I was there doing their audit, and I went to go visit my business law professor, and he encouraged me to apply to law school. He felt like I had a natural knack for it, and I was very much interested in business law. So I applied to UNM and got accepted. And after actually graduating from UNM, I went back to the accounting firm that I was working with to do litigation support and realized I really wanted to be in the courtroom, and left and worked for a civil defense firm for a few years before I was contacted about applying with the state. And what really appealed to me about my first job with the state of New Mexico was the opportunity to run an agency. And so that's kind of how my career started with the state of New Mexico. And 18 and a half years later, I'm still in the state of New Mexico. And interestingly enough, in an office that practices criminal law, which I never imagined in a million years that would be the realm I would be in, considering my interest was really in business.
Wow, that's amazing. Now that we have that background, let's go to the meat and potatoes of what I wish I knew. If you've tuned into prior podcasts in this series, I am going to mix up the topic order for you a bit. We're going to first go to the topic of growth. So President Martinez, you just gave us a quick rundown of your journey, but coming out of law school or at any point since then, did you have a plan that you tried to follow when it came to career development, or what really did that look like?
That's a good question. When I came out of law school and having had the accounting background, I really thought I was going to do something related to business law. And the firm I was working with, although they were mainly an insurance defense firm, they had me working on cases that were more business related. And actually prior, just up to me leaving, they were going to have me handle some accounting malpractice cases. So it was all very intriguing. I really thought I was going to be there long term, maybe do the partner track. And then I was approached by a colleague about applying to the Gaming Control Board. And what they needed was a CPA board member. And so I interviewed with the then governor, which was Governor Richardson. And again, the job was very appealing to me because it was the opportunity to see an agency-wide, be able to run an agency. And so I took the leap of faith and went for it. So for sure, my career has not taken a path that I expected that it would, but I've been very blessed and very appreciative of the opportunities I've had since I've been with the state of New Mexico.
That's really cool. So the Gaming Control Board was your first agency. Did you have an interim between then and now at the district attorney's office?
Yes. So I worked for the Gaming Control Board for 4 years for the first term of Governor Richardson's governorship. And then I was approached by then state auditor to come and be their deputy because, again, I had the CPA degree. And I think these connections all came through because of my law degree. So when I got approached about gaming, it was a colleague that was an attorney. When I got approached about state auditor's office, it was again because it was a colleague of mine that was an attorney. But they approached me because of my skill as an accountant and as a CPA. So I was the deputy state auditor for 8 years. So for the entire 2 terms of that state auditor. And then after that, that state auditor became the attorney general, and I joined them in their office, and I was there for a few years and then made the decision to join the district attorney's office.
So I'm hearing your journey was pretty organic and not a 5-year plan, 10-year plan.
Absolutely not. I think if you would have told me when I graduated law school 25 plus years ago that I would be where I am today, I would have not believed it.
Very cool. All right, going to self-promotion. So in our careers, oftentimes we have to promote ourselves and create our own opportunities. What are some of the ways during that organic journey of yours that you have had to promote yourself during your career?
That's a great question. I think in many ways that I've, promoted myself, if that's the right word, is just when I saw opportunities or voids in the organizations that I worked in, I would gain knowledge about that area. And a good example of that was when I joined the Gaming Control Board. Obviously, going to state government, it was very different than private practice. And I learned and just sort of sat back and observed a lot of things, became very knowledgeable about not only the gaming laws, but how government operated in general, how the Open Meetings Act worked, how the Inspection of Public Records Act worked. And then when I got to the state auditor's office, for me being a numbers person, it was natural for me to learn the budget process. And I learned it some when I was at the Gaming Control Board, but it really became a thing. And I was sort of thrust into it when I was at the state auditor's office, because frankly, none of the other attorneys wanted to really touch it. And so I sort of became the person that became interested in it and learned it. And so it's naturally been part of my job duties moving forward for the last 14 plus years. And so it's just an example of where I would see voids, I would just sort of go for it and learn it and ask questions if I needed to, but really research and become the person that learned that piece of how an agency functioned or that area of the law. And so I think in a way that's how I self-promoted myself and became very valuable to those organizations because of the knowledge that I had gained over the years.
You didn't break the mold, you subsumed other molds and filled it all in.
I think that's a great way of explaining it.
Very cool.
I didn't wait for others to tell me that that's what I should do. I just took it upon myself to learn different things and go for it. And figured if somebody wanted me not to do it, they would tell me, but no one did. So I just went for it.
There you go. So you mentioned several times you went to different agencies and got different opportunities because of colleagues that you had connections with. But did you have any specific mentors during your career, and how did they help you?
Definitely. And at different, I think, points in my life, I mentioned the business law professor that I had in undergrad. He was definitely a mentor. The law firm that I worked at, I had several attorneys there that were partners that really became mentors for me, particularly one in particular. He was an undergrad English major. And so whenever I drafted any motions, any briefs, he really would redline them. But I really felt like he made me a better writer because of it. And then when I was at the Gaming Control Board, I actually had a mentor who was not a lawyer, but she was a very successful woman, a businesswoman. And I looked up to her and she kind of took me under her wing. And for me, it was new being in the government sector and being sort of entrenched in the politics. It was a very political agency. And she really took me under her wing and guided me in my career. So I've definitely had several mentors in my career that have helped me along the way in different ways.
And why would you say mentors are beneficial? So speaking directly to the mentees out there, why are they beneficial, and what can we do to get the most out of our mentorship relationships?
That's a good question. I think mentors are great because number one, a lot of times they've been there, done that, and so they can share their personal experiences with you. Maybe the things to avoid or to look for in your career. And I think a lot of times mentors encourage us and they see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. And so I think mentors are great for that. And I forget the other part of the question that you asked.
No, that's okay. What can we as mentees do to get the most out of our mentorship relationships?
I would say just ask a lot of questions and pick the brains of your mentors, and don't sort of predict who you think your natural mentors are going to be. Like in the case of this woman, she wasn't an attorney. But she became a mentor for me because she was a leader in the business community and she was a woman. And so I looked to her as a woman to say, here's someone else out there that's successful, and how did she do it? And she was very humble in her approach to things. And so I think a lot of times as mentees, don't predict who you think should be your mentor, but rather just, for me, a lot of it is organic. And maybe you're in a certain area of practice, but maybe there's somebody out there that there's a characteristic about them, an attribute, something that you really appreciate or want to emulate. And I think seeking those things out is important.
That is great advice. I know that many young lawyers, myself included, we sometimes have difficulty identifying a mentor because we think that we need that certain person or that certain avenue. So do you have any, going on that same vein, any useful things to look out for to identify some of those otherwise maybe untraditional mentors for people who are having difficulty finding someone?
I think a lot of it is just trust your instincts. If you seem to have a good rapport with somebody, go with it. Even if they don't seem, what's the word I'm looking for? Just an obvious pick for you as a mentor. go with it, trust yourself in that capacity. And the other thing, now that I'm an older practicing attorney, I've had younger females say, "You're my mentor," without knowing that that's the way that they viewed me. So I think sometimes mentors don't even know they're mentors until the mentees express to them that I see you in that role. So I think that's another good bit of advice, is not just assuming that the person knows that you look to them as a mentor, but rather have a conversation with them about, you know what, I really look up to you because of this, and I really like this about you, or I really want to learn this from you. I don't think there's anything wrong in expressing that. And as somebody who's had people come to me, it's flattering. And frankly, sometimes you're like, wow, I didn't know you thought of me that way. We just work together every day, and we're kind of in these meetings and we're doing our thing. But to have that individual say, well, I'm watching you and noticing you, and there's things that I look to in you that make you a mentor for me. I don't know if that answered your question.
I don't know if it did either, but I liked it regardless.
Okay.
I think it made me, do you see that also as a two-way street? I'm just wondering if thinking to my own experience, if maybe there's people who I haven't identified as a mentor who consider them my mentor, and should that conversation go the other way too?
That's an interesting question, and it probably does happen, especially if you are a more experienced attorney, and let's say you have certain associates working on a case with you, or whatever the structure may be. There may be this natural assumption that, hey, I'm their mentor because I'm teaching them how to litigate this type of case. So I do think that probably happens, and it would be nice for the mentee to know that this person is looking to me as maybe their right-hand person or their successor, or I really see something in you and I want to teach you as much as I can about what I know. So yeah, I think that does happen, and it's a conversation that should happen. And you can't just assume that the younger, less experienced attorney knows that.
That's definitely food for thought for me too, is what exactly that mentorship, how those mentorship relationships organically come to be, and they may exist without anyone actually communicating about it.
Exactly. So some of it's organic, but I think communication is always key, and people should express what they're thinking or what they want.
Wonderful. So I think you said earlier, sometimes we should just jump into things. So with mentorship relationships and reaching out to those maybe untraditional mentors. So outside of the mentorship relationship, tell us about a time you took a professional risk and how it paid off or didn't pay off.
I think a professional risk I took was when I was approached about joining the Gaming Control Board. I had a career path going at the law firm. As I said, they were starting to get me more involved in more complex cases. They were looking at me becoming the point person for some accounting malpractice cases. They were already doing medical malpractice, and they started to go in that direction because of my background. And then I was approached unexpectedly about this opportunity with the Gaming Control Board. And it was a huge leap for me because, number one, I hadn't worked in state government. I had audited state agencies, but never actually worked in one. And then I took a position that was a political appointment. So if for some reason it didn't work out, the position would be over. And so I definitely think I took a risk. And And I remember the very first meeting we had, I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? The room was packed with all of these licensees and other people that are interested in knowing who this new board was that was going to be regulating them. And I remember thinking, I am way over my head. I don't know anything about the gaming law. And even when I interviewed with the governor, it was, I didn't even know this agency existed. So I had to really do a deep dive and understand what I could at that time. And then a lot of it was just learning on the job. But definitely it was a leap of faith going into an agency, going into an area of law I hadn't practiced in, going into a highly political environment. I was, and I think I still am, the youngest board member there ever was. I was 32, had just turned 32 when I was appointed. And then a year later, unfortunately, the chairman of the board had suddenly passed, and I was then appointed the chair of the board. So it was definitely an experience, a great experience, but definitely thrown into the deep end of the pool when I made the decision to accept the appointment.
Wow. You just blew my mind. I'm 32 and I could not imagine being appointed in something that big right now. Oh my goodness.
The Solutions Group, the State Bar of New Mexico's EAP provider, offers confidential and free professional counselors to support employees and their direct family members by offering short-term counseling, assessments, and referrals for any life struggle. This includes drug addiction, relationship conflict, anxiety, depression, and grief and loss. Other services include dependent care, crisis assessment and intervention, educational presentations, free well-being webinars, and an online stress assessment tool. Call 505-254-3555 or 1-866-254-3555 and identify with NMJ Lab to schedule an appointment or video visit.
So that is a great springboard to our next topic, going into day-to-day relationships. So you kind of gave us a little teaser of what it's like being an administrative government attorney. And most people are unfamiliar with these types of roles. Most people are more familiar with litigation, things where the courtroom is the main focus. So can you tell us more about working in these government administrative positions, the state auditor, being a chief of staff, being a chief administrative officer? What does that day-to-day interaction when you're not really in court look like?
I would say every day is different. And a lot of it is, in my roles, it was administrative in nature. So not only was I, in many respects, the general counsel, drafting contracts, I think learning employment law has been a big thing for me, because then I oversaw the entire operations. And so obviously employment issues come up and you have to learn. You have to learn how to navigate through employment issues and the different laws that surround employment issues. And so I think, again, every day is different, and depending on the type of agency you're in is the type of law that you are going to focus on with these surrounding areas, becoming familiar with the procurement code, becoming familiar with Inspection of Public Records Act, and then of course, becoming familiar with the statutes that directly involve that agency. So Gaming Control Board, learning the gaming laws, the state auditor's office, learning what the State Audit Act was, and learning what our responsibilities as an agency were. And then of course, drafting regulations. So we spent a lot of time, particularly in the state auditor's office, drafting regulations to assist these different audit firms in knowing how to conduct their financial audits or specials. And then now at the district attorney's office, I'm less involved. I'm not involved in the criminal side of it, the prosecution, but I'm definitely heavily involved in contracts review and contract drafting and the employment side. the procurement side. So it varies, but yet there is some similarity of threads that run through all of the agencies because they are state agencies.
You're like the behind the scenes wizard behind the curtain person making all the magic happen.
I think that's probably a good way of describing it. Is I always say I'm the person that's making sure the foundation is stable so that all of this other work can happen, the prosecution of cases or whatever may be the case, just making sure the foundation is set.
So what do you wish that you knew about interacting and coordinating with colleagues, both in your office and then across the different government offices?
Wish I knew. That's a good question.
Or stories about pitfalls or successes in interactions?
I think probably a learning lesson, whether it's been depositions that I've conducted or participated in, or whether it's, you know, high-level meetings with electeds or legislative, there's always going to be those moments where there are going to be tense moments. And I think the important thing to remember is as long as you're doing the right thing and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, there are always going to be people that don't agree with the decisions you make, that are not always going to agree with the position you take, but that's okay. And not to take it personal and to always be professional in your interactions, even when it can be difficult, because people can push your buttons. But I think doing that and thinking in that respect, I remember in particular being at one of the agencies and we had individuals we were regulating and they didn't like a decision that was made. And then I got a really ugly letter in the mail from one of the licensees. And I just was, if I'm not, what's that saying? If you don't upset people, you're not doing your job. And so I felt like I made the right decision for the right reasons and not for some nefarious reason. And therefore my job is to regulate you and you're not always going to agree with my decision, but I'm doing it for the right reasons. And I just have to remember that and move forward and not take it personal.
I think that's a great tidbit of advice, even for private practice attorneys. It's a different environment, but it's all the same considerations.
Absolutely. I've been in some tense depositions, and you just have to remember the other side's job is to advocate for your client. You're there to advocate for your client, and you're not always going to agree, but you try to remain calm and professional. And remember, at the end of the day, your colleagues, and you're doing your job and they're doing their job, and it's okay. And you can walk away and still be friends.
Absolutely. So speaking of clients in these government positions, who do you consider to be your client, and really the details of how that differs from the typical attorney-client relationship that people see in law firms?
That's a really good question. With the district attorney's office, our client is the state of New Mexico. In some of the agencies I've worked for, depending on the role I'm taking on, if I'm general counsel, my client is my elected official that I'm working for. So it depends. And I think sometimes even in those roles where you're administrative and you're wearing different hats, you have to step back and think about who is your client, particularly when you're dealing with privilege issues. I think that's particularly important, because are you wearing your hat as the general counsel and there's attorney-client privilege, or are you wearing your hat as an administrator and is there privilege there? So it is important to really know who your client is. And I know that can be very vague or gray at times when you are working for an agency versus when you're in a law firm, let's say, and it's very clear, you have an agreement with that client, you know that they're your client, and it's set, whereas in a government agency, it's different. And particularly, again, I'm not prosecuting cases, but just the things I observe, there is that challenge sometimes, particularly when you're prosecuting a case and the attorneys are working with victims, reminding victims that they are not the client, but rather the state of New Mexico is the client.
And then the same when you were with regulation, reminding the licensees, they're not the client. You are regulating them. It's
Exactly.
different. It's backward.
Exactly. And our client at that moment is the state of New Mexico.
Very, very interesting. So is there anything in particular, you talked already about making sure to take those steps where you saw maybe a hole or a drop off, you went into those areas and learned those areas so that you could feel not only more prepared, but also to make sure those other jobs got done. Is there anything, maybe this is like a domino or waterfall situation, that made you feel particularly prepared as you go to the different positions within the state?
Absolutely. I think when you're in the state, particularly when I spent 10 years, almost 10 years in Santa Fe, which is really the hub of state government. You really get to know individuals. And I think it's benefited me. Number one, every year you have a legislative session and you have your budget and you have other bills maybe you're trying to pass. So learning that process carries through to any agency you go to. And then just learning the different areas and the way state government works. If you are needing, let's say, to get a contract done, with what regulatory agencies within the state of New Mexico do you need to go through for approval? And it changes depending on the type of agency you're in. The same can be said for employees. You know, if you're in a certain branch of government or you're in a different type of agency, you may not be regulated by the same office that's regulating these employees. And so learning the nuances and the ins and out of state government and how it works has definitely helped me in all of the agencies that I've worked for, because there's procurement and there's budgets and there's human resources issues. And so learning how they all function has definitely helped me throughout my career, regardless of what the overall mission of an agency was.
That makes total sense. And what other advice can you give young and new lawyers or any lawyers who might be contemplating a career change about navigating the world of state employment?
Are you asking if they decide to join state government or
are interested in it, taking that first leap?
This is what I always tell people. Try it out, whatever it is. And if it doesn't work, you can always go back to what you know. And so I think take the leap, particularly when you're early in your career and maybe you're thinking in law school, this is the type of law I want to practice, and you've made up your mind and you get out there and you're thinking, this isn't all I thought it was going to be. There's something missing. Listen to your instinct, try something else out. And I see that happen quite a bit at the DA's office when we interview attorneys. We'll interview attorneys that maybe are in private practice or they're in a different governmental agency. And a lot of them will say, I just am not feeling fulfilled in my job. I want to work somewhere where feel like I'm making a difference in my community or I'm making a difference for a client. And so if that's really kind of drawing you to do it, experiment, try it out. I mean, there's no harm in trying it out. And then if you decide this isn't really for you, you can always go back to what you're doing or even try something new. I always say I'm a master of none, because every time that I've gone to a new agency, I've had to learn something new and sort of recreate myself in that position. And so I think because of that, I feel like I've had a really interesting and fulfilled career. And I'm thankful for it.
So I've heard some of my colleagues and friends, young lawyers who seem almost too intimidated to go into state employment because it is such a big world with all of these interrelated agencies. But what I'm hearing you say is just do it. It's going to be different no matter where you go. So just do it.
Just go for it. And the thing is, you don't have to bite off everything at once. I mean, I have 18 and a half years of experience. I didn't learn everything I know overnight. It has taken years and it has taken step by step. Even the budget appropriation process, every year I do it, I learn something new about it. And for me, you don't really learn until you're kind of in the thick of it. You can tell me how to do something, but until I go through it myself, it doesn't really feel tangible. So I would say don't look at the big picture and be intimidated by the big picture. Go for it and just, what do they say? If you want to eat an elephant, although I hate that expression because I love elephants, you bite it one bite at a time. I love elephants. So, anyways, so I would say don't let your fears override something that you're interested in doing. Just go for it.
So that leads great into the next section on balance. So speaking of big picture, speaking of the long view and perspective, maybe it's a generational thing. Growing up, lawyers my age, we have been seeing on television, you have to think about your 5-year plan. You have to think about your 10-year plan. And I think that it scares us. It's intimidating to not be able to be worried that we don't have that. But what I'm hearing you say is not to worry, and it's okay.
It's okay. I mean, eventually you definitely want to think about your plan. But I think when you're early in your career and even later in your career, there's nothing wrong with taking a chance and changing things. Life is short and you shouldn't. And not that I'm saying attorneys are, but if you're in a position where you don't feel fulfilled, why be there forever? And then reflect back on and think, I regret this. I should have made the change, right? And so, yes, everybody should make a plan, but don't let that override any decision you make that you think might be a good decision for yourself.
Just because it's in your plan, if you're not loving it, if you're not fulfilled, don't be scared to go into that next step.
And change your plan.
And change your plan. Amend your plan.
Exactly.
You don't have to ask anyone to amend your filing there. You can just do it.
Exactly.
So then how do you in the last 18 years take that bigger perspective, see above the minutia of the day-to-day interactions and stay motivated on, whatever that goal is, whether it is making sure you are feeling fulfilled or something in a long-term plan? How do you maintain that perspective? Keep the eye on the prize no matter what your prize is. How do you do that?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll be honest, it's hard at times. There's days you lose your focus. There's days where you think, why am I doing this? Right. But then I think there are clients or there's employees or victims, others that give you feedback. And then you remember, this is why I'm doing it. This is what I'm fighting for. Or you reflect back and say, why did I go to law school in the first place? Why do I want to be a lawyer? And I think a lot of times going back and sort of reflecting on those things helps you to stay motivated. And when the days get hard, because they will, there's going to be days where the practice of law is not easy and it's dry. And you're thinking, why did I do this? And I think going back and sort of grounding yourself and remembering why you're doing it helps in those difficult times.
Or even sometimes when it's not dry and it's too active and chaotic, you still need to go find grounding.
Exactly. And in those situations, you need to find a peaceful, what grounds you there, whether it's your family or it's hobbies or whatever it is that helps you stay grounded. Because people have to remember, being an attorney is one aspect of your life. It's not your entire life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Self-care, well-being are huge. So what do you do, President Martinez, to take care of yourself? And how can you tell when it's been too long since you did it?
Well, I think for me, it's been an evolution because I tend to be a type A workaholic. And so that has sort of, and then when I started out in my career working for an accounting firm, they promoted the long hours and being seen by the partners. And then even when I started commuting to Santa Fe, it was, oh, well, I don't want to take a whole hour for lunch because then my day's that much longer. So I think for me, it's been an evolution. And to be honest with you, I think having a family has helped me ground, because before, when I was single, I could just continue working and I would be fine. But when it starts impacting your family, you have to take a step back and reflect on what's most important. And I think COVID in particular has really, for me, put an emphasis on you can't take anything for granted and you have to savor those moments, even the simple things. You have to savor them and you have to live in the moment and be present, because life is super unpredictable right now. But I think for me, it's spending time with my family, hanging out with my dogs, being out in nature. And when I know it's too much is when I'm grouchy, when simple things at work that normally don't bug me, then I know it's time to take a breather and take a day off, or, do something, get a different focus, and then come back. And I usually find I'm refreshed and I'm more patient and I have a different perspective on things.
I think that those trigger moments, being able to identify when it is that we need a break, is it's a skill in and of itself, being able to notice that about yourself.
And be patient with yourself, because there's going to be some days you're better at being healthy and taking care of yourself than other days. And it's okay. You got to forgive yourself in that process too.
Absolutely. Give yourself, grace and patience. I think so often as type A lawyers and personal info, Carla and I actually have the same birth date. We are both Capricorns, and I think sometimes micromanaging others is a problem that we have.
Or taking ourselves too seriously.
And micromanaging ourselves and taking ourselves too seriously is a problem that we have. So yes, giving yourself grace and patience is a skill that we need to develop and maintain. How else, President Martinez, have you had to create boundaries between your professional and private life? And how do you maintain those, not just during COVID, but pre-COVID and looking to the post-pandemic, knock on wood, future?
I think it can be challenging because in positions as attorneys, you don't have someone else to step in when you need to take a break. It's you and only you, and you're unique. And so finding those moments where it's okay to take a vacation and to turn your phone off and to disconnect from the world and be okay with it. And know that, guess what? When you come back the following week, the world hasn't crashed. Everything is still moving along. And so I think setting those boundaries, and it's not something I've always been great at my entire career, but it's something that I practice all the time. I try to practice all the time, and I try to get better as I move forward in my career. But I think that, and then also trying to leave at the end of the day, work at work and go home and be present in the moment. in your personal life, whether it's you're engaging with family or you're out with friends, trying to leave those work moments at work and focus on what's in front of you and enjoying it. I think are important boundaries to set for yourself.
During pandemic, did you have a period of work from home time? And do you have any tips or tricks on how to navigate leaving work at work when work is in the living room?
For me, I did do a lot of remote work, and because there were several of us in the house, my workspace ended up at the kitchen table. And so I consciously every night shut my computer down, put all my work stuff away, and did not leave it on the table. And that was my sort of mental way to shut the door at the end of the day on work. And so it worked for me. And I think the other thing was just having a routine. Even though I was home, I still got up at the same time and did the things I normally would have done had I gone to the office. And so it was having that routine that I think helped me kind of be able to separate home from work when possible.
Those are really, really smart ideas that I wish I had implemented during pandemic. Maybe if we do another round of stay at home, I will be more good at that. So you talked about setting boundaries, and kind of the day-to-day. Do you have any tips or tricks on time management implementation or keeping focus on specific tasks?
I think for me, I keep different calendars. I keep a work calendar, I keep a home calendar, I keep a state bar calendar, and I sort of have a central place where they all are. And I try, my thing is every Sunday before the work week starts, I sit with my calendars and kind of make sure that I know what my week's going to look like, mentally prepare myself for my week. And then if there's some overlap or something that I didn't catch, then that's my opportunity to hopefully give people a little advance notice to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do that, or can we rearrange it? I'm a planner. I think that's the Capricorn in me.
For sure.
So always having that plan ahead of time for me is important. I'm not a last minute person. And, you learn to deal with that and be flexible when it happens. But to the extent that I can plan things out, I do that. And I will at work if I have a project going and it's taking a lot of time and then other people are coming to me needing something, I always try very hard to communicate back right away to give them at least an expectation of, hey, I hear you. I know you need this, but can I talk to you tomorrow about it, right? Usually asking people, what's your deadline? What's your expectation? I think is helpful as well. And then I can communicate back and say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be available. Is it possible for you to talk to this person? And so those are the ways that I try to keep balance amongst the different balls I have juggling in the air and trying to make sure I'm meeting deadlines.
And then you're not leaving other people hanging too.
Exactly.
So do you have like 3 separate or 4 separate hard copy planners, or have you gone all digital with color coding Google? What do you do?
I have part electronic and then part hard copy. And part of it too is I don't want my personal stuff on my state calendar because of,
that makes sense.
It's a government. And so I do have some things electronic and some things hard copy. Or what I'll do is if I have something personal, my calendar on work will not have details, but at least it flags me to know there's something there. And so don't schedule.
Even if it's just a chunk of time that says blocked.
Exactly. That's a lot of what I do is just block. And then I know, okay, I can't schedule a meeting at this time, or I'm going to be busy doing something, without going into a lot of detail. And then I'll keep my separate calendar that will have more detail, because I'll look at that block and think, I don't remember what that block meant.
Block A, block C, which calendar number does that coordinate to?
Exactly.
Yeah, that is a great tip and reminder too for new, young, or whatever government attorneys, is you gotta be prepared for those IPRA requests. Don't put things in your email and on your calendar that you don't want the whole world to know, because they can find out about it.
Absolutely.
So obviously, President Martinez, you have the unique position of being a rock star volunteer attorney. You're president of the state bar. You have a home life. You're a government attorney. So are there any other maybe otherwise untraditional support networks that you haven't already told us about that have helped you do all of the things that you do at the same time and be successful in all of those realms?
That's a good question. So number one, I would say my boss, the district attorney, he's very supportive. And so I think without his support, it would be very challenging to be able to volunteer, especially this year as president of the state bar. It's taken up a lot of my time. And so I think the fact that he's been really supportive of my role is incredible. I think having other past presidents to reach out to has been incredible. You know, Brent Moore has been a huge supporter and somebody that I have reached out to when I have questions. And Tina Cruz, the recent past president, she has been phenomenal. She really reached back, and I'm trying to pay it forward as well with Carolyn Wolf. But Tina, throughout last year, she didn't just look at it as I'm the president this year. When things would come up, she would reach out to me and say, Carla, you know, just want to give you a heads up about this, because this is likely going to come up in your year. And so I felt much more prepared coming into the presidency than I think I would have otherwise. And I really appreciated that from her. And so I've tried to do that with Carolyn too, so that Carolyn's better prepared. And really, we may be the president that year, but it's the state bar. It's an organization, and our role is to help lead, but it's not our organization. So anything we can do to help make it stronger and to make it more seamless, I'm all for. And then of course, my husband just, he goes with the flow, and I bounce a lot of things off of him. And he's always like, whatever you want to do, I support. So if it weren't for him, I think it would be challenging too at home to be able to balance it all and say, I'm going to be taking time already away from the family to do these other volunteer programs. And so he's a retired firefighter. He's been a public servant his whole life. So he understands the importance of giving back to the community. And hopefully that's something we're instilling in our daughter as well.
I definitely think that's super important. It's hard to be a volunteer if the people in your life don't support you in that goal.
Absolutely. And he and I, you know, our wellness journey, we try to take walks with the dogs every night, and that's our time to kind of debrief the day and talk things through. And it's been good.
That's awesome. So our last final topic is money. As an accountant and fraud examiner, you know a lot about money. So take us into your world, Carla. I'm guessing that billables doesn't come up for you, hasn't come up in quite a while since you were in private practice long ago. But that is the framework that most young lawyers understand is the billable hour. Before you started working for state offices, what do you wish you knew about the billable hour, and about how that differs from tracking your time as a government attorney?
That's a great question. So I think, you know, when I worked for an accounting firm, the billable hour was based on a 15 minutes, so a quarter. So it was very different. I was obviously familiar with billable hours, but when I got to the civil defense firm, it was, oh, what do you mean I have to bill my 6-minute increments? And so I think the advice I would give is really sit down with those that have been doing it a lot longer and really get their tidbits and advice on how to do it better. There was a partner that I worked with who would constantly come to me and be like, Carla, I know you're not billing all your hours because you're here all the time and you're shorting yourself. And I appreciated that he took notice and that he was concerned, because he said, you're here early, you're here late. I see your billable report. It's not adding up. And so I think it's helpful. And really, I wish I would have sat back and said, okay, well, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Can you give me some pointers on how to do it better? And I didn't. And so then I just continued to do what I did. Right. And I would continue to get the feedback that I wasn't billing. I was shorting myself in my billable hours. Interestingly enough, when I got to state government, particularly at the state auditor's office, we had to track our billing. And so part of our budget was funded through audits that we conducted. So it was important for auditors to track the time they were spending on an audit because it impacted our budget. And the other way that I tried to make things efficient is I said, okay, guys, we may not bill the client, but you have so many hours you're allocating to an audit and you need to be efficient with your resources and your man hours. And so we would create budgets and we would monitor those, because I couldn't have somebody tied up in an audit for months on end. And I think there was sometimes that mentality of, well, we're not private practice, we don't have to track our hours, but you still have to be efficient and you still have to be able to get all the work done. And so I did implement budgets when I was there and I told them, you need to treat yourselves like you would a private accounting firm, because you're out doing audits just like the private accounting firms are. And so it was definitely a shift in mentality. But I think even though government doesn't have those billables, there are opportunities to take business models from private practice and apply them to government to make it more efficient and effective.
I love that. The whole idea of a time budget, hour allocation, threshold and limits. I like that.
Thank you.
I'm going to steal that.
Go for it.
I'm going to steal that. I'll be like, all right, paralegal, this is your hour allocation for this project.
Right.
I like it. Carla, what does a certified fraud examiner even do?
So and how I ended up as a certified fraud examiner is when I was at the state auditor's office, I at some point took over our special audit division. And so we would go out and conduct fraud investigations. And so I thought, well, here's a new opportunity, an area to learn. And so I went out and got my certified fraud examiner certificate. And honestly, there's so many areas that you can go with it. There are people in this that do IT audits. There are people that are investigators. I mean, it really is an interesting area. And it doesn't solely apply to just accountants. And so every year there's a international certified fraud examiner conference that happens. And it's always interesting to participate and just see different people from all over the world who are considered fraud professionals. And I think I'm trying to think of some really high level scams that have happened where fraud professionals have been involved in fighting fraud. But what's been interesting about it, and what I learned at the state auditor's office, is what they call the fraud triangle. And so in any organization, you really have to look for the 3 sort of red flags. And I'm not saying just because those flags may be there that someone's committing fraud, but in my time at the state auditor's office, and every fraud exam we did, it never failed. Those three areas, those touch points were always there. And the first was really, what's the underlying pressure? Does the person have a drug addiction? Does the person have a gambling addiction? Are they living beyond their limits? In one case that we did, the individual had a child who had a drug addiction, and they were in a rehab center. And so they needed the funding to be able to pay for their child's rehab. And so it's sort of, that is the first underlying thing, is there a pressure point in someone's life? And then the second piece is, there an opportunity? Is a person in a position of opportunity to take? And then the last is rationalization. Because people can have pressures in their life. All of us have pressures financially, bills you have to pay, and you may be in a position like an attorney who has access to trust funds. But that doesn't mean just because you have access to trust funds and that you have made some, maybe all of a sudden you have a sick child, or there's some financial pressure you didn't have. That doesn't necessarily mean an attorney is going to turn, or someone else is going to turn to commit fraud. But that third piece is rationalization. People start to rationalize, well, I don't get paid enough to do this job. I really do deserve to make more money. So I am going to take this from the company, and I am going to use it to support my lifestyle. And so when those three things occur, those are just red flags for people to really pay attention to, whether it's, like I said, trust funds, or they're inside of an organization, and my experience has been, usually you just scratch the surface, and when you dig further, there's a whole lot more there. We had one case where a woman had committed some fraud in a school district, and she admitted and said, I only took about 100,000. Well, then when we dug into it, it was over $1 million. So my experience is, there's usually more once you start really digging into it.
Oh my goodness. And those three flags that you were just talking about are very familiar from our trust accounting classes to maintain our licensure. Those are kind of the situations of be on the lookout for these, and amongst yourself and your colleagues to not slip into this. So do you have any insight maybe for the mid-level person who might not have those pressures or rationalizations themselves, but might be stuck in the middle of it, that they can, I don't know, I guess it would be whistleblower, reach out, like any insider flags that they can look for when maybe they feel like they can't reach out?
I think, it's a touchy situation, because you don't want to accuse somebody of something and then you don't know for sure. But, things to look for is, does the person look like they're living beyond their means? You as a mid person, you get a sense of what people you work with, another associate is making, whatever. And if you're stepping back going, gosh, they really seem to take a lot of vacations, or God, they get a new car every year. I don't know how they pull it off, right? Because you're looking at you guys are making similar amounts of money, but they really seem to be living this lavish lifestyle. Those can be red flags for people to sort of step back and say, maybe there's a little bit more here going on, or maybe there's a legitimate reason. Maybe they have a trust fund. Maybe they recently had a parent unfortunately pass away and they gained an inheritance. Who knows what could be, but those are definitely some red flags out there. If you're seeing things just don't add up in your mind looking at it, those are things that you can look at and start to pay closer attention. Other red flags are people that don't ever take time off. People that are committing fraud, a lot of time they don't take time off, because they don't want someone else to step in and do their job and all of a sudden discover whatever is going on. Another sort of red flag in the attorney world would be if you have a client who says, I've paid that bill, but I'm not getting credit on my account for it. There is a practice called lapping, where somebody can say, okay, I received this check. I didn't apply the check to client A, so I'm going to take client B's check and I'm going to apply it to client A's account. And then when client C sends me their check, I'll apply it to client B's account. And all of a sudden it's this, you're trying to play catch up. So if you have clients who are complaining that, I made that payment last month, but you guys aren't showing that I made the payment, those can be potential red flags as well, especially if you're seeing a pattern.
And do you have any advice for those mid-level people once they're seeing these red flags about what they can do, who they might be able to reach out to? Is there a hotline?
Well, the state auditor's office does have a hotline, but their jurisdiction is all government agencies. But I think it depends on who you think it is. Maybe you go to a supervisor, maybe you go to the head of the firm. But if you're thinking it's the head of the firm or it's the payroll person, it just depending on who you think it might be. If it's a firm situation, you would need to take those steps and kind of figure out who's the appropriate person to report it to allow them to maybe take further steps from there and do an investigation. But if it is a government agency, there is the state auditor has a confidential hotline 24/7. It's not manned by the state auditor's office. And you can report things that you think are going on within any governmental agency within the state of New Mexico, whether they're a state agency or not.
President Martinez, it has been a pleasure to chat with you today. I have one last topic that I want to ask you about, and it kind of goes back to red flags on fraud, but hopefully not. Student loan debt. Student loan debt is a big concern for young lawyers right now. The YLD did recently host a virtual brown bag discussion about student loan debt management. That recording is up. There are also a lot of other resources out there to help. But do you have any hot takes or financial tips that you would like to share for particularly young lawyers dealing with student loan debt?
I think, not without knowing what each person's situation is, generally speaking, I think always the best thing people can do is evaluate their own financial situation and set up a budget. Set up a budget that you try to stick to every month. And on there, you keep your fixed costs, the things that every month, if it's rent, if it's a mortgage, if it's my student loans, it's my car loan. I personally, all my utilities are budget billing. So I know the same month what my budget for my utilities are. For me, that's predictability. Everybody is different. And I think, they always say number one takeaway, even depending if it's the smallest amount of money, pay yourself first. Pay yourself first, even if it's $10 a check or $10 a week or whatever it may be. Over time, it adds up. And I think the other thing, and I know I was guilty of this when I was a new attorney, is, I can't afford to put money away into my 401k. Do it. And if your firm is agreeing to match, that's money you're leaving on the table. Really try your hardest to put away into those 401ks and try to get to a place where you're taking advantage of your firm's matching. And then the other thing is really analyze what I like to call the black hole. What are you spending on going out to eat? And, I worked with somebody that every day they stopped off at Starbucks before they came to the office, and they went out to lunch every day. And if you really step back and say, okay, I'm spending $5 a day on coffee, over a week, that's $25, over a month, that's $100, over a year, that's $1,200 you're spending on coffee. That's $1,200 you could put towards your loan payment or put some of it into a savings. So I think really kind of evaluating those black hole moments and try to find ways. Maybe it's you don't completely deprive yourself of Starbucks. You go to Starbucks once a week and then make coffee at home. Those type of things, I think those little shifts can make a huge difference. And the other thing is really, what is your goal? What are you trying to reach? And it's easy to be out somewhere and like, that's a really cute dress. I really want that dress. But then you step and say, is that really worth it? What's my long-term goal I'm trying to get to? And do I really want it? Or do I really want this long-term thing? And you have to make that decision for yourself. But I think those are some tips in trying to at least help people budget. Now, again, I recognize the incredible amount of debt that people come out with, and sometimes it's just unsustainable too. And just finding those ways. And the other thing is, it doesn't hurt with some of those recurring costs you have, like your insurance for your vehicle, or even your cell phone bill or your cable bill, calling and asking them to renegotiate those things for you, right? I'm a valued customer. What can you do for me? And if you can't do it for me, I'm going to go to someone else who will give me a better deal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with looking at your bills and saying, I've got to give somewhere, and I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask my internet provider. I'm going to ask my insurance company. I'm going to ask my cell phone company, my cable company, whoever, to reevaluate my monthly bill.
Take your attorney advocacy skills and advocate for yourself and your budget.
Absolutely. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense and is very useful. I know that one of my pandemic pitfalls is I started subscribing to basically all of the streaming services, even though I still have cable. So that makes no sense to be paying for both. So that's my hot take, to reassess that.
That's true. That's a really good point. And then you think, well, I'm only paying 10 here and 8 with that streaming service. But really, if you look at it over a long period of time, it adds up.
All up. Yep. All right, President Martinez, is there anything else on any topic that you would like to share about what you wish you knew?
I think the best thing to do as a young lawyer is just, don't always try to fit into some mold. Don't try to always plan and predict what the future is going to be or what the job's going to be. Seize those opportunities when they exist, even if it's an opportunity you didn't envision for yourself. And I appreciate talking to you today, Shasta.
Very sage advice. Thank you, Carla. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Member Services Department in the Young Lawyers Division. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Kevin McLeod at Incomtech. The views of the presenter